Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mental Health TV. My name's Nicky Lambert. I'm here again with my lovely colleague, Vanessa.
Hello, everybody. Vanessa Garrity. Looking forward to joining the conversation tonight. I'm actually on holiday in the Lake District, so my Wi-Fi is a bit patchy, but hoping to stay with the conversation. I'll be doing the social media tonight, so if you're following on Twitter, it's MHTV hashtag, and we'll feed any comments, questions into the conversation. If you're on Facebook, if you like the Unite MHNA page, you can follow the live stream that way as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. And we're joined tonight to talk about all things substance use and life in general by Ian. Ian, do you want to introduce yourself to the...
Yeah, thanks for that, Nicky and Vanessa. So I'm Ian Hamilton. I work at the University of York, and I'm a registered mental health nurse, but haven't been in practice for some time now. So I started my career, and most of my career was spent working with people who were homeless and had co-occurring mental health and drug and alcohol issues. And I've kind of carried on that theme or that interest in the academic work that I do. So it's been really great. You know, it's a wonderful thing about nursing is you can have more than one career, can't you? So yeah, I feel really lucky.
And we're going to do something a bit different. Normally we will have a chat and then we'll come to questions, but tonight we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to start off with a question. So this has come from Helen Kehoe, who's a CAMHS background. So whilst nursing within CAMHS Tier 4 settings, it was always beneficial to have safe, open, educational conversations on substance use and mental health. Do you think it would be beneficial to have more conversations like this within schools? So this is a question about schools and starting to have more open conversations. What do you think, Ian?
Well, thanks for the question, Helen. And I guess it also applies to parents thinking about, talking to their children. And it is quite interesting, the evidence around school-based interventions on drug use. I think we probably, even if we've not experienced it, we'll be familiar with the type of scenario where maybe the police are pulled in to talk to teenagers in a school, or someone who's in recovery comes in and talks about their life. And I think both methods, although they're interesting and almost intuitively you would think are worth doing, the evidence points the other way, and the evidence suggests that actually those children, it makes no difference, and worse still, the children who didn't really think about using drugs, it then raises their curiosity. So it's counterproductive. I think the main message and brief around school education is to make it age specific. So you can't deliver the same type of intervention for a 12-year-old as you would a 17-year-old. And again, very broadly, you would be able to maybe make it a bit more specific to drugs the older the child gets. But I'm no expert on this. I just listen to what others say, and the others, people like Ian McDonald, that some people may know on here, would say that actually for a 12 and 13-year-old, you don't even need to mention drugs or alcohol. You just talk about, things like peer pressure, how to say no effectively. So yeah, I don't know if that helps, Helen, but that would be my thinking. I don't know what you guys think, Nicky and Vanessa.
I think we don't do enough about building. I don't think resilience is a tricky old topic, isn't it? But I think there's something about, exactly as you say, about raising confident kids. So a child who knows who they are, what they want, how to say yes and no, and how to have friends around them and create a peer group that's supportive, because that's what's so needed. And I think there is something about being isolated, being lonely, being perhaps a bit more vulnerable, that actually puts children in the way of harm, of all different kinds of harm, and this is one of them. What about you, Vanessa?
Yeah, I would. Speaking.
It looks like you're going to have to put that in the chat box. We'll repeat it in a minute. But yeah, absolutely. So something to be said about supporting children. We also wanted to talk about 3 or 4, we can circle back to topics, but we wanted to bring in quite a few different aspects. And one of the things I wanted to sort of ask you about is what's been the impact of COVID on people's use of drug and alcohol? Do we have any data on that yet?
There's little bits coming out. There's probably a bit more on alcohol than there is on drugs, which, that's a useful reminder, isn't it? That when you have a product that's illicit, it's really difficult to measure what's going on for obvious reasons. So with alcohol, just very quickly, it looks as though what's happened is those people that were drinking very moderately prior to COVID or were abstinent have more or less continued that. So those at low risk have continued to be at low risk during COVID, and they make up the majority of people. There is a significant proportion of people who were drinking at hazardous levels prior to COVID, and they've actually increased the amount they're drinking as far as we can tell. So there seems to be 2 very distinct groups. With regards to drugs, it depends which drug we're looking at. And so I think the easiest way I can summarize it is there's been very little disruption to the market in terms of pricing, availability, supply, as far as we can tell. I think the only thing that might have happened, but we'll have to wait and see, is it makes sense in a way that people would use less MDMA and other stimulants, and perhaps be more inclined to use depressants. So by that, I mean drugs like benzodiazepines, alcohol again, and even cannabis. So, but that's, the information on that is a bit patchy at the moment. So it's more just a kind of guess, really. But the data will become available, and it'll be interesting to see what it reveals.
Well, I think it's always interesting because it was kind of like British or English culture around drinking anyway. Was the first thing that happened with all the kind of the COVID memes and things like that, which they're not an accurate portrayal of what's going on in society, but they do show us what we think is funny or what we think is relevant. It's the amount of alcohol-based jokes, commentary. It was straight through the roof, wasn't it? So part of that is anxiety, part of that is not having to go to work, and all these different sort of coping mechanisms. And it's always seen as so acceptable. Yeah. Not to have a drink, but to be drunk. No. And it's really interesting the way we approach it.
It was quite telling. I did a piece for The Independent around alcohol and what was going on. And a very small line in there attracted quite a lot of attention. And that was, I can't remember how it was phrased, but basically suggesting it might be an opportunity to try a dry COVID. And that really stirred a hornet's nest. So, everybody piled in on that and said, if it wasn't for alcohol, I wouldn't be able to cope. So it's quite telling, really. And I hope I don't think I phrased it in a way that was meant to be, argumentative or accusing people in any way. It was just as I say, a suggestion. But there's clearly some sensitivity around that. So yeah.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think when you use your voice like that, you never know what part of it is going to resonate with people and what they're going to respond to. But interestingly, it shows that, exactly as you say, a sensitivity around that issue. Vanessa did just post a question. We have a chat box going on as well, saying, and it kind of circles us back to the nursing curriculum. So why is substance misuse not taught particularly effectively in the nursing curriculum? So obviously different unis approach this differently, but it's a valid point, isn't it, that we don't always do a brilliant job of it. It seems to be less important, yet drug and alcohol use on the increase. And that's a Facebook question that's coming from one of our colleagues. So have you any thoughts about how we approach drug and alcohol in the nursing curriculums?
Yeah, I mean, it's no surprise. I think it's essential, really, because there's no aspect of nursing care that isn't impacted by drug and alcohol use at some point or another. So whether you're an adult nurse, a child nurse, or a mental health nurse, it doesn't really belong to one area. And the full spectrum of drug and alcohol use is going to impact on your nursing career. So people who, as I mentioned a minute or two ago, are low risk in terms of their alcohol consumption, right through to people that are, extremely chaotic, dependent, and really suffering, as it were. So yeah, I'd see it as essential. I think, to be honest, it's the same problem with medicine. It's really patchy. And clearly what happens, I think, within higher education nursing teams is that you are unlikely to promote, deliver, facilitate these type of sessions if it's not something you feel comfortable with. Or even for some, I think, who perhaps bring a moral view to this privately or publicly, which I understand. I don't agree with, but I do understand it. And my concern is, I think sometimes what happens is it's a bit like awareness around ethnicity and culture, is that what people... The slight danger with training is that what you can end up with is people learning the right language to use and their underlying beliefs haven't changed. So you have nurses who, say all the right stuff, but actually underneath all that, their beliefs are the opposite. So they still hold those stigmatizing views, but know that they can't express those at work.
Well, I think as well, we ignore the fact of how many people in practice, how many people who are qualified staff actually have stresses around alcohol themselves, particularly alcohol and drug use. But I can remember when I was a baby nurse back in the day, with people saying so-and-so's come in with a cold, they need to go home. And there was no referral to occupational health. There was no support. There was no really open acknowledgement that person had an addiction issue. And I think, I'm glad those days are gone. I hope they are. But I do think there's something to be said about the fact we don't always acknowledge our own issues in nursing as well as we might do. Did you want to add anything, Vanessa?
Yeah, just like it's a bit like every other ism. So, racism and mental health stigma, where people say that they don't have non-judgmental views, but then practice indicates otherwise. So for me, what it makes me think about is working in the prisons and trying to get vulnerable women referred onto housing or for mental health support once they come out of prison. And, the amount of sort of judgmental sort of documentation that I've read as a reason to exclude women from support after prison, is really quite surprising, and it has been written by qualified nurses, and usually dressed up as sort of a risk issue, when really it's lack of understanding about vulnerability as well that's led to drug and alcohol use and trauma. So I would say, like I say, quite similar in the way that we talk about within the profession, that we don't stigmatise mental health, or that our systems aren't racist, but our systems are often set up in a way where we exclude people on the basis of drug and alcohol use. So I just really wanted to make that point.
I think on the upside, the really wonderful thing I've witnessed is when particularly adult students go on a placement, it can be really transformative, if they're exposed. It's nothing revealing, is it? We know that contact with people, whether they have an addiction issue, a mental health issue, or whatever it is probably one of the most powerful things that can happen in terms of people changing their view and their mind and their attitude. But of course, there aren't enough placements to get every student through. So it's again, that's not going to solve things. But as I say, it's one of the best things I've seen happen in my academic career, and really encouraging to see that change in the way people view this client group.
What do you think it is about the nature of sort of substance use that makes people feel that they can be judgmental about it?
That's an interesting question. I don't really know where it comes from. Well, you suggested, that there could be some personal issues. So if people have first-hand experience, themselves or a family member or a friend, it's just fear of the unknown, isn't it? I think, it's that othering, isn't it? It's not something I recognize. It's not something I would do. And of course, that leads on to another issue, which is one that we all got to battle against. There's this idea that people have choice. So I chose not to use drugs. Why can't you choose not to use drugs? And of course, the choice, people do have a choice, but the decisions around whether to use drugs or not is quite often a choice that's made for people. It's a way of surviving, a way of coping, trauma, or even just not just, but, having symptoms. None of us can really tune into what that must be like. Particularly, if you're feeling depressed, anxious, psychotic, whatever, there's a drug for all conditions, really. They don't ask awkward questions. There's no waiting times. They don't demand an appointment. They're not intrusive, and they're available at the drop of a hat. And so that's what we're competing with when we.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And also, there's something you have a cachet, you have a kudos, you have a group if you're using alcohol and drugs. Whereas if you're using psychiatric medication, that's less often the case. So, and also, a lot of the medications that we have to offer aren't ideal for people. They're not problem free themselves. So there's a lot of complexity around that.
Yeah.
One of the questions that seems to be coming through is, has there been an increase in alcohol and drug related death? I guess that means over the last year, perhaps. Do we have that information yet?
No, it's due out fairly soon, unless it gets pushed back. So it's the Office for National Statistics who produce an annual report, and of course they've not been looking for work to do over the last few months. So it's possible this might just be pushed out a little, but it will become available. But this time last year we had the annual report, and again, depressingly, it showed that a new record had been set for drug-related deaths, and the numbers involved have overtaken road traffic accidents. So the parallels there are quite interesting. You think about the investment there's been in reducing road traffic accidents in terms of car design, in terms of education, seat belts, so reducing the risk. And clearly that's what we need to be doing with drugs and alcohol. Is we'll never eliminate drug and alcohol use. And it's important to say, actually, for most people, drug and alcohol use is a really pleasurable thing. We're all a bit weird in the group that we belong to, because we never see anyone that's doing great, do we? We only see people that have problems. And that distorts your view, I think, it distorts my view. I'll own it. And I need to remind myself that people with problems due to drugs and alcohol are in the minority and not the majority. But nonetheless, whether you use once or 100 times, making sure it's as risk-free as possible, I think should be a priority within nursing.
So just to clarify for people watching, what is it that people are dying of when we're saying drug-related deaths?
Yeah, good point. So in the main, it tends to be opiates, so heroin. That said, few people will die of a single drug. They tend to be combinations of drugs. So typically heroin and diazepam, or heroin, diazepam and alcohol. Just sort of interjecting on gender there, we know far more about, or rather, men are more likely to die due to drugs, according to the data. But then what's emerged fairly recently is that may be a distorted reporting, because coroners are less likely to investigate a suspicious female death, particularly where drugs might be indicated. So I suspect we've under-recorded the number of female deaths, and that kind of matters If we know, don't we, because over the last 10, 20 years, if you don't have data, you can't make the argument for services and to provide support. So it's really critical we have that data.
So what's the picture like at the moment then for services at the moment? Because from whenever I've seen it, it's not been going great. Our policy seems to be lagging behind. Services seem to be being outsourced quite a lot. Am I getting the correct picture from that?
Yeah, absolutely. We at one point, going back to the 1990s, the early noughties, the UK led the world in terms of the type of drug treatment and support we offered. Since then, I don't want to bang on about it because it is quite depressing really, but one of the telling things that has happened is we've wiped out and made extinct addiction psychiatry. They're an endangered species. Now, that wouldn't happen in oncology or cardiac care. You wouldn't get rid of all the medics and consultants with all their expertise. This needs to be a multidisciplinary effort. And of course, the reason that addiction psychiatry has been decimated is because it's been erased to the bottom in terms of commissioning, and they're just too expensive. Nurses are fairly expensive even though they may not feel they are. But when your budget keeps shrinking year on year, there's only so much you can do. So I'm not blaming any of the drug treatment providers, but I'm definitely blaming the government. And again, I think this is something to do with the wider population. The government wouldn't get away with this if it was unpopular. So again, this brings us back to choice, doesn't it? So most members of the public would just view this as people making a choice to use drugs. Therefore, it's up to them to sort it out.
Okay. So is that reflected in policy as well? Do we have up-to-date policy?
Yeah. So the mantra we're all getting used to is from Boris Johnson and colleagues is we're following the science on COVID, but they're certainly not following the evidence and the science when it comes to drugs and alcohol. Alcohol, very telling, isn't it? Not once in those briefings was alcohol mentioned, and the fact that it increases the risk of dying if you contract COVID. And off licenses at the beginning of this pandemic were put into the same category as pharmacies and deemed essential. So that to me is quite telling, really, of where not just this government. I'm not Tory bashing. I think governments of all colours have had a very cosy relationship with the industry, and the industry's worked hard to achieve that.
Definitely. So thinking as well, you did make some waves recently with a letter talking about morphine, talking about pain management, and sort of being a little bit more political. Can you tell us a bit about that? What that campaign was for?
Yeah, this was in May. It became apparent that not secretly, but behind the scenes, the government was aware that there were some problems with the supply and distribution of morphine. Not for people with drug dependency, just every other type of patient, as it were. And of course, if you do contract COVID, what we know is, it can be painful, but probably one of the biggest risks is obviously to your respiratory system. And what morphine does is that helps just relax you and get you into a more steady breathing pattern. Any delay in administering morphine obviously increases the risk of getting more uncomfortable, but also of a cardiac event, so having a heart attack or a stroke. So it's really quite critical. So myself and I think about 50 or 60 other colleagues from around the country wrote to the Home Secretary asking her to loosen the regulations around morphine. It's extremely tightly regulated. Some would say quite rightly so, but it was and still is, I think, inhibiting and preventing people getting treatment in a timely way. And no great surprise, the government makes the right noises on this, but there's been no change.
And it's interesting to me because even during our short conversation, you've talked about writing, speaking out. Is there some advice or some thoughts you have on maybe nurse voice, how we use our voices, how we use our professional knowledge?
Yeah, we're pretty timid as a group, aren't we? You know, again, I've got to draw parallels with our medical colleagues who, you know, are well organised, vocal, and effective in lobbying their own interests. And I'd love nursing to be in that position. You know, healthcare is political, undoubtedly, in terms of who gets what and why. And I think most nurses are aware of that, but it's just having this collective way of organising ourselves and you know, being agitators, being advocates is not something that we have a great deal of experience with. Unlike medics, who, you know, that knowledge, that skill is passed from generation to generation, and it's not seen as something exceptional or you know, people rocking the boat or whatever. You can provide good nursing care and be politically active. The two aren't, you know, they don't compromise each other in any way. They complement each other.
So how did you get started? How did you go down that route a bit more?
Me, Nicky?
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess you quickly figure out, don't you, that while you might be able to influence your peers around you, if you start engaging with the media, you're able to potentially influence a wider group. So that was my thinking, really, and a desperate need to become famous.
Job done. Go
on.
Vanessa, did you want to come in on that? Because I know your signal's been a bit wibbly.
Yeah, hopefully my signal's holding okay, so I apologise that I haven't been as vocal tonight. But no, just what Ian's saying resonates with me, that I think as nurses we have to be political, and people think of politics in terms of party politics, don't they? And I think that, you know, at the end of the day, mental health nursing is linked to social inequality, and we have a responsibility to advocate for people and demand better services and better care for people who are vulnerable and don't have a voice. And I always see, you know, mental health nursing as being quite privileged, in the sense that we have a voice and we can speak for other people, so we should speak for them. And I know myself and my colleague Andre Mental Health covered one of Ian's events the other year, which was on women and drugs. And for me, it really opened my eyes actually to some of the sort of gendered issues around drug use, particularly in terms of the way services are designed around men. And then I think after that, going to work in prisons, you know, seeing the reality that there aren't very many, for example, family units where women can remain with the babies, which mean that a lot of the time, you know, there's forced separation within families. Whereas if we provided family-centred services for women who might have addictions issues, usually related to vulnerability, trauma, mental illness, then you know, the recovery rates, you know, being able to keep families together, much more positive outcomes. So for me, you know, I haven't been able to stay quiet when I've seen these injustices, and I think as a profession, you know, we shouldn't be staying quiet. So I absolutely, you know, agree with you. And I think whether we use social media, or whatever we have kind of within our gift to use, we should be speaking out about these things.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a fear in nursing about saying something that makes people not like us, or doing something that's unprofessional?
Yeah. It could be, couldn't it? It's I think, I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear what other people's views are, really. I do wonder, like I was saying before, if it's just not seen as compatible, you know, being an agitator politically, having a view. You know, we're not meant to have views, are we? We're meant to be non-judgmental, head down, get on with it, graft. You know, it's. I mean, striking is an obvious example, isn't it? You know, it's very, very rare that we withdraw labour. So I think there's some intelligence to be gathered there, isn't there? What's that all about?
Yeah. We've got a couple more questions coming in. Did you want to ask them, Vanessa?
Yeah, we've got some questions coming in. My signal's quite hit and miss, so I apologise if there's a delay in terms of us asking these questions. We've got a few here on Facebook. One is, which I feel we have talked about, but if you want to add anything else, and that's about how can services be made more inclusive for people who are seeking substance use disorder help. And then it says, in my experience, the postcode lottery and homelessness are barriers to access and help. So any comments around inclusive services and about homelessness and postcode lottery?
Sorry. So what I would say with regard to being responsive and inclusive is, if you look at what's happened to mental health over the last 2 decades, we've seen a transformation in the way that mental health is delivered. So when I started training, it was very much an appointment-based system. So you would come along and see your CPN, or come to an outpatient clinic. And now, what's changed all that is assertive outreach. We hunt you down in the community. We don't wait for you to turn up. Now that's very different to what's going on in most, not all, but in most drug treatment services. They are back in the mind frame and delivery of an appointment-based system. And underpinning that, there's a little bit of, when you're ready, you come and see us, rather than intervening early. So I find that really interesting, given that there's many people who have both issues, a mental health issue and a drug and alcohol issue, and the approach of, at best, if they are getting a service from drug treatment and mental health, it must be a little bit perplexing to see those very different attitudes and approaches.
It's interesting, isn't it? 'Cause it's almost like using it as this way of screening out, helping people. So you come to us when you're ready. We wouldn't say that with any other, say, pre-diabetes or something like that. We'd be having triggers and encouraging people to come forward for support and saying, if you have an issue, come to us. I've just been looking on Facebook as well, and there's people having a rare old conversation without us. Good for you, Lynn and Adrian, saying wiping out of addictions nurses, and then someone urging that person to move to Scotland, where apparently they have lots of addictions nurses, and saying about the type of rehab that it used to exist that doesn't exist anymore. Have you any thoughts about harm minimisation? About where we need to go with it? Is that the option? What should we be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. We've again, this is where politics, has influenced what's going on in terms of drug treatment. So in 2010, when David Cameron was Prime Minister, there was a clear move from harm reduction to abstinence, and that was signalled and encouraged through commissioning of services. So the thinking was that, we'd, up to 2010, we'd been not sufficiently focused on abstinence, and we're too focused on reducing harm. And of course, you need both. It's not one or the other. But that was a political decision. It wasn't based on evidence. It was just.
I think it's moral as well. It's a moral choice rather than an evidence-based choice. It's the whole kind of just say no kind of.
Yeah.
Just. Following the science.
Well, that's it, isn't it? It's unfortunate that the evidence is being ignored. It's not a case of just being cherry-picked. It's just being ignored. So we're all familiar with SAGE, the body that advises the government on COVID. And there's a group called the ACMD, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, and they have a statutory duty to advise the government on all issues related to drugs. So around harm minimisation, they definitely support that and have advised the government. But they've also advised, quite rightly, that we should be giving optimal doses of things like methadone, a substitute drug that's used for people that are opiate dependent. So there's very simple, low-cost things that we could be doing now that would make a significant difference to people's ability to stabilise and possibly recover.
So what do you think would make the most difference?
I think optimizing the treatments we're already using, so making sure that we, give sufficient doses of drugs like methadone. It's that simple.
I've got a bit of a mysterious direct message come through here. It says, and I assume it means in a professional capacity, Ian. What does Ian think about meth? #Breaking Bad. So I guess it's that meth, not the other meth.
Oh, methamphetamine, is that what?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to now, it's something that's been really problematic in Asia. We haven't really seen a lot of it in Europe, apart from in countries, old Eastern Bloc countries, Latvia and so on. But there does seem to have been a change recently, and I'm not sure how it's going to play out, but Mexican cartels have been collaborating with mainly Dutch MDMA labs. So there's been some sharing of intelligence around how to produce methamphetamine. Now, it might be that's just so they can continue supplying the Asian market, but I would be really surprised if there wasn't some kind of increase in supply to the UK and across Europe. But we'll have to wait and see.
It's been updated. Crystal meth is what they've
crystal
just
meth.
said.
Yeah. It's it's a drug that it's difficult to see an upside to be honest. I wouldn't say that about most drugs, but I think the damage that it can create is pretty horrific, really, and particularly to mental health as well.
Yeah, I think where I've seen it most is in the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah,
and it has been decimating. In the experience I've had of it. So it is something I think that nurses need to keep up to date with. And it's always difficult, I think, for me as a nurse. And one of the things I've always found really difficult is when you have sort of like you want to talk, but you don't want to use young people language at people because it's just so cringeworthy and so terrible. But there is something idea about street language, about understanding kind of common parlance for drugs, and I think that's one of the things that maybe puts people off.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And also we're quite shy about sex, aren't we? And sex and drugs go really well together. It can be one of the main motivations, not just for the LGBT community, but for straight people as well. It's not an area that's been well researched, and yet could yield so much information and really help us to help others.
So mixed up in terms of subculture, in terms of payment, in terms of pleasure, in terms of lots of different ways of thinking about it, and not necessarily all negative, but until we understand that mechanism better, we can't really help so well.
No, we're far too skewed in academia and in practice on the risks and the problems associated with drug use. You need to understand, or we collectively need to understand why people are using drugs, what it is, what are the benefits, what do they perceive to be the gains, even if they're not actual benefits. And once you've understood that and you have an insight into that, it then helps us with things like dependency and other drug-related harms or problems.
It's interesting as well because we're all up in so young kids' faces for smoking cannabis. But when we have like swathes of middle-class people on coke, we never seem to say anything to them about their behaviour not being terribly helpful for the rest of the community. So it's an interesting one, isn't it? No such thing as fair trade cocaine. There's no point drinking your herbal tea, shopping at Oxfam, and taking coke.
But again, that was a clear political move, wasn't it, by I can't remember if it was Priti Patel or Sajid Javid at the time, but the Home Secretary basically accusing the middle class of contributing to the rise in knife crime and violence. And of course, there is very little connection between the two. What the Home Secretary got muddled up about was county lines and cocaine dealing. Now, county lines isn't about dealing cocaine. It's about heroin and crack cocaine.
Can you just explain county lines for anyone who hasn't come across that before?
So this phenomenon of having young adolescents, young teenagers who, you pick up drugs in urban areas in cities like Birmingham, and then had been using anyway the rail network to get out into more provincial areas, rural areas, and I guess just expand the market. So that was deemed or tagged as county lines. Still going on.
Nurses need to be aware of it because it's a safeguarding issue,
yeah.
particularly because of the transportation of young people away from home, and they're often children who've been care leavers or vulnerable in other ways.
Yeah.
The other thing that raises it as a safeguarding issue is that they could be cuckooed. So if you've got someone who's an older adult or someone who's vulnerable, maybe with learning disabilities, sometimes a gang will set up a group of kids nesting in that person's house. And as well, again, as you were saying, alongside that, you see people are not being fed, people are sometimes being sexually or otherwise exploited, as well as being forced into sort of criminal behaviour and activities. Because, I mean, if you want to sell drugs to children, you really need children to do that. You can't have some dodgy-looking bloke standing outside a school without everyone calling the police now. So the times have changed and selling's changed.
Maybe this kind of shows where the problem lies, is that we should really be moving drug use and problems associated with it to health. It should be removed. The responsibility for policy lies with the Department of Health and Social Care, in my view, not the Home Office. So, that's something that could be easily done by Boris Johnson. He's not risk averse, is he? So
he makes a fair number of random choices. This could be another one.
Yeah, good. And it's a simple one. I'm not sure it would be politically risky. I can't see him losing voters on this. It's a kind of administrative thing. I'm not even sure most people would be interested, but it would make a significant difference to ourselves as nurses. And more importantly, to clients, to patients.
And it has that gender aspect again to it, doesn't it? Because if you accept that a young girl can be forced into sex work, then why not appreciate that a young man could be forced into drug work?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's I've seen something here from Alfonso, and I think he's circling back to something that we were talking about before about why nurses sometimes struggle to speak up. And he's saying, I think it could be more about fear of losing registration or fear of not fitting in with organisational values. So that's a really valid point. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
We've whizzed through, covered some ground again tonight, and we're sort of coming towards the end. I wondered if we could just pop round and see if there's anything that people want to finish up with, maybe something that's going on that's positive or any further questions. So, Vanessa, do you have anything that you wanted to raise?
There's no further questions, but one thing that I think we haven't really touched on much, and we haven't got time, so maybe it's a future session, is we touched on recreational drug use, but I think the sense that, there's a study I know in Newcastle that's partly Newcastle, partly European, I think, as well. And that really opened my eyes around recreational drug use in terms of, for example, people using amphetamines to get through the cleaning, ADHD, self-medicating. Obviously, we haven't talked much about non-prescription drug use as well, which is clearly, a massive issue. So we talk a lot about, the obvious heroin, amphetamines, etc. We know there's a massive underlying problem with people either using prescription drugs without prescription or using drugs recreationally just to get through the day. So I guess any thoughts from Ian really about what's current, and maybe it's something that we need to come back to as well for another
I think it would be really good to come back to that if people would tolerate us again. But it's a really exciting time to be involved in this area. Perverse as that may sound, I don't mean it that way. I just mean in terms of our understanding, our knowledge, and also the market disruption that's taking place. That's been one of the biggest changes I've witnessed in my career. When I started, there wasn't the internet, and this idea of prescription drugs in the UK being difficult to source, that's no longer the case. You can providing you do a bit of planning. It's not a spontaneous thing. You'd have to order them online and then wait for them to be delivered. But most people are able to do that. And that's been a real game changer, I think. So yeah, definitely up for looking at that and hearing others' views on what they've experienced in their practice.
Yeah,
we're just getting a ton more questions in now. Now I've said we're stopping. So some people want to ask about fentanyl and the use of nitrous oxide. So what's your view on it? What are the harmful effects? That's fentanyl and nitrous oxide. Yeah,
well, they're two great examples. They're at either end of the spectrum. So nitrous oxide, or laughing gas, as most people know it, is a pretty safe drug. Probably one of the safest drugs. The main risk with laughing gas is the way that it's inhaled. So sometimes people will, use a bag to inhale it, and obviously that cuts your oxygen supply. So people can suffocate. It's not the chemical; it's the way it's taken. Fentanyl, just very quickly, a huge problem in America. There's been, myself included, people trying to prophesy that it will be a problem in the UK. It's just not happened yet. I don't know if that answers the question, but again, that's maybe something we could come back to when we look at non-medical use of prescription drugs.
Yeah.
We've got a really interesting question here asking about why the UK, and I think you're supposed to be answering on behalf of the UK there, Ian, no pressure. Why does the UK have a fear of opening safe injection houses?
Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? Some of the fear, I think, is around, if you open up a safer injecting facility, it condones and encourages use. Again, there's parallels with mental health. When we remember the move from hospital to community care, a lot of concerns then about, people living next door to someone who has psychosis or bipolar. And the way around that, we found, was engaging with the local community and having some contact. So I think the same is probably true of this issue as well.
Mm. So I think we are going to try and finish now. This time we mean it. Have you anything that, I don't say if you had last words, Ian, but that sounds a bit grim. So have you anything that would be really helpful for people to sort of take away and think on?
I think I just kind of repeat what I was saying a few minutes ago. I think this is a really exciting time to be involved in drug and alcohol treatment. And even if it's not something you feel you've got direct experience of, fortunately, most of the interventions are really simple, but can be really effective. So this isn't a complicated area to get involved in. It's an area that you can pick up some skills pretty quickly. And just very briefly, those skills are nothing fancier than the good old-fashioned communication skills. Listening is key, summarizing, reflecting, paraphrasing, just being interested. That would be my bottom line. So yeah, I'll leave it there, really.
Vanessa, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, just really love, as always, when I have a conversation with Ian.
Yeah, I think I'd second that.
Yeah,
absolutely, and particularly as you might well be if you're kind enough to come back, you might well be our first 18+ episode if you're going to talk about sex and drugs. that could be great. I think perhaps we should finish on that note. So thank you very much for everybody and for the interest you've shown and for the questions you've asked. If this is an area you'd like for us to talk about more, that's no problem. We can certainly do that. Let us know. So thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Bye. Bye.